questions for clarification, just for 10 minutes. But please feel free to use the chat box, post any questions that you have during the presentations. We will answer some of them as we go along, and the others we can discuss in the plenary session. After that, we will have breakaway sessions for about 45 minutes, and you'll be given a list of questions to answer in those breakaway groups. And then there will be a short 15-minute report back from each group before we close. So just some housekeeping. Please keep yourself on mute unless you are the speaker. Obviously, that helps with any background noise. If you can use the chat, and if you have any questions for clarification, you can ask these during the feedback session after the plenary. And at the end, we're going to send out a survey to everybody to evaluate today's session. So for those of you who are unfamiliar to Zoom, you will see a chat box at the bottom of your screen. This is where you can send messages to the whole group or to people individually. If you are broken away into a small group and you discover that you're in a group with many other people from your own organization and you want to move out of a group, you can click the Ask for Help button and Julian will move you to another group. And for the presenters, if you can use the share screen option when it's your opportunity to present. And we will now begin with the presentation from StudyTrust. Over to you.
Thanks, Emma.
Emma, could you just stop screaming? Thank you.
That you'd like to ask about the office.
Can you see our screen?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, Marie.
Yes.
Yes, we can, Marie.
Yes.
Are you taking it into presentation mode or can I
Yes,
start?
I am. Okay, go over to you, Trace.
Okay. Good morning, peers, fellow practitioners. We look forward to sharing with you today our learning journey into what we have been doing with our beneficiaries in their adjustment to learning online. The themes that we will focus on today in our presentation are fostering educational resilience and reducing cognitive load. We thought it would be appropriate to look at where we left off in our last presentation to this forum. And that was where we introduced the research of Gavina Grunwood, who looked at the Fees Must Fall campaign, and she specifically used this capabilities model to evaluate educational resilience. Now, we thought this was particularly an important link. Our topic of e-learning, because beneficiaries, what we are seeing, at least in our beneficiaries, is that they already have some basic or intrinsic skills in terms of e-learning, and these can be built on. But my colleagues will elaborate on this further in the presentation. Next slide, please. All the programs that are rolled out by our student support program are grounded in our REAP framework, where through our programs, we aim to move our beneficiaries from a space of mere survival to thriving within their own potential. Today, we wish to highlight this theme of resilience. Next slide. And an example of how we wish to do that is by introducing this concept of metacognition. The way that Bloom introduces or talks about metacognition is through his learning index. And what he says to us is that learning actually happens at level 3, which is the one that we've highlighted here, the apply level. And the way that we think about it is when we think, cognition is basically thinking, metacognition is how we think about thinking. And what is important about that is if we can think about how we are thinking, we can also learn about how we are learning. So it is important in our learning journey and in the learning journey of our beneficiaries that they also think about how they are learning and how they are assimilating the information. Now, what's important about this learning index or this taxonomy of Bloom is that a lot of students are still gathering the information at the base level, which is still memorizing. Whereas the apply or knowing how to do is where the learning is actually happening. Next slide. Now, if we are knowing what we need to know and knowing what we need to do, this brings us to the next important concept, which is learned. Now, through our interactions with our students, we have also learned a lot or heard them speak about feeling overwhelmed and feeling stressed. And we've broken it down in the slide, which would help you understand it. I'm sure we've all experienced these types of feelings. So what cognitive load basically means is if we are feeling in a bad mood, everything that we do or touch automatically just feels like hard work. If there is inconsistency in the instructions or in what we are doing, what we are trying to do just feels unfamiliar. It feels like what we are doing is just not sound. If there is a confusing display or mixed messages that we are receiving one way or the other, what is being said to us feels untrue and we sit with feelings of disbelief. And in this final one, again, I want to link to Bloom's pyramid because it also links very well with education. And I'm sure all of us that have been through, especially tertiary education, can identify with that idea of having been primed before your lecture and having to pre-read. Because going into a lecture without, having that prior knowledge or being unfamiliar with what a lecturer is going to talk about just puts you on a bad foot. And when you come out of that lecture, you actually feel bad, you feel confused. And this is true even when we go into meetings or we go into presentations or we do basically anything where we are not prepared. So having said this, I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who will take you through the more practical experiences and interactions that we've had with our students.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Rambarosa. I'm the Bursary Applications Manager at StudyTrust. So I'm going to speak about the capabilities approach to fostering educational resilience in the face of cognitive load. I define the capabilities approach according to the theories of Sen and Nussbaum. The capabilities approach of Amartya Sen spoke about the human, social, psychological, and cultural capital that people draw on for their well-being. Marta Nussbaum's capabilities approach focused on individual human dignity as impacted by social, political, and economic factors. In the case of COVID-19 and the challenges our students face, the focus of the capability approach is on what students are able to do with the skills and networks they have so as to cultivate resilience in the face of challenges such as cognitive load. Our students come from challenging backgrounds, but they have developed skills over the years to cope with those challenges. Although they are self-motivated, some are struggling with the isolation that online learning creates in the context of COVID-19. How do we support them to overcome this struggle? Working from the capabilities approach, students are encouraged to build on their existing skills. So if they have developed a mechanism to work under difficult circumstances, but are struggling to focus, we could remind them of their academic goals and elicit from them the actions they have to take to meet those goals. By drawing on their own solutions, they take control of their situation, which leads to the enhancement of already attained skills. The next step is to encourage them to share their skills with others in a supportive community, such as a network of students or tutors, peer mentors, and senior mentors. Many students are afraid to ask questions in a classroom environment. The relative anonymity of online platforms may just be a way for those students to ease out of their insecurities and may alleviate their sense of isolation. Offering help and seeking help not only increases their knowledge, it builds confidence. It also inculcates a sense of achievement, which can be empowering. In this way, they are reminded that they have agency and an internal locus of control, as opposed to an external locus of control, where things happen to them and over which they have little or no control. Having an internal locus of control strengthens the skill set that the student has, and it also motivates them to find solutions to challenges instead of feeling at a loss because of a perceived sense of incapability. So what does having an internal sense of locus of control really mean? In the diagram to the right, you will see that this is explained as I make things happen. That is, I form my own strategies to fulfill my needs. I can do something about my situation. The idea is to invite students to reach out, contribute, respond to these challenges that COVID-19 presents in a way that builds their resilience. I will now hand over to my colleague Mokhabisi, who will take us through our programs in response to the challenges faced by our students as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Morning, everyone. I am Mokhabisi Pajane, and I am the Wellness Officer at StudyTrust. So I will be taking you through the activities that we have implemented in response to what students reported to be experiencing due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the wellness survey was sent to our students in the very early days of the COVID-19 outbreak. And this was to follow up on their physical, emotional, psychological, and academic well-being. The main objective was to just determine how students were adjusting and finding the transition to lockdown, and most importantly, how they are impacted by it. The survey also served to give us an idea on how to approach our students, and it heavily informed the intervention that followed after. From the surveys, there were reports of students feeling quite anxious and very uncertain about the transition into the online learning. And one of the main programs that we implemented was the wellness program. So it was channeled towards students who expressed that they were experiencing some emotional difficulties from the wellness survey itself. So the program is based on the awareness that the COVID-19 pandemic has evoked some uncertainty, has triggered depression, high levels of anxiety, and also stress. And all these can be due to obviously the change in learning context, the change in environment, and the increased cognitive load. So how we have tried to mitigate these mental health difficulties, we have done regular and quite intensified follow-up with students who have reported experiencing emotional difficulties, and still made use of the referral networks that are operating now online, and some of them telling.
Hi, sorry, we seem to have lost you. Maria, I wonder if another member of your team should take over.
Hi, Emma. So I will take over from here since our colleague Mukhabisi is struggling with network at the moment. And my name is Susan. I am the mentoring and support coordinator at StudyTrust. And my colleague was also going to talk about how we've been using the mentoring conversations with our students to foster educational resilience and to assist them to get to a stage where they feel self-actualized during the process of online learning. I will now share with you some of the feedback from the students on how these conversations assisted them to navigate online learning. Marie, can you please go to the next slide for me? So as you see on your screen, this is a story that we received from our first year student who is studying computer science at the University of Cape Town. And she was struggling in the beginning of online learning, but after implementing certain strategies, she improved significantly. So her main challenge in the beginning of online learning was coping with the workload and managing her time well. She fell behind in all her courses and she had to play catch up throughout. This is exactly the cognitive load that Tracy spoke about earlier on. And as we know, due to the pandemic, the curriculum was disturbed in a way. And when students reopened for online learning, the workload was and the pace was therefore much faster than it would have been before. And without the lecturers and the tutors to offer face-to-face assistance to the students, they're expected to lead their own learning process. So our role in this regard has been to share this with the students, the strategies that will assist them in reducing this cognitive load. And thus, by doing that, we are empowering them to lead their own learning process. This student in particular consulted with her campus coordinator, who shared with her time management strategies to assist her plan out her day and cover her work accordingly. Certain apps like the to-do list and the Keep Me Out application were recommended to her for her to overcome procrastination. And with this information, the student was able to create a realistic schedule that allowed her to plan her work properly. The student also had a conversation with her peer mentor, who informed her of the support and the resources available on campus. So we have been liaising with the support services on campus to find out what is available for students during this time. And in this case, the student was referred to the tutoring WhatsApp group available in her department. So the reason why I'm sharing with you such stories is just to provide context in terms of the challenges that our students have been facing with online learning and how we have been assisting them by equipping them with the strategies that they need to facilitate their own learning process. So I will now move on to the second story that I'm about to share with you. And this is from a third-year electrical engineering student who also struggled with online learning in the beginning. And in her case, her main challenge was the disruption of her normality that came with the whole process of online learning. And Tracy mentioned earlier on about the impact of inconsistency and unfamiliarity on students' cognitive load. So since now they had to move everything to online learning, the student was expected to adjust her learning structure and her study methods to that required for online learning. She also knows the importance of quickly adapting to the new normal by implementing certain strategies that were required. She highlights the role of her peer mentor as a motivator during this time of adaptation. And in this case, like my colleague Muhabisi had already mentioned earlier, that the student already had the required skills internally to adapt to the new normal. And our role was rather to encourage her to use those skills to facilitate her learning process. And from the two stories that I just shared and the presentation that my colleagues presented earlier on, we can say that our approach to supporting students with online learning has been directed towards facilitating the process of student self-actualization by assisting them to adapt to the new ways of learning while also encouraging them to lead their own learning process. So we have been mostly focused on just getting them to a space where they are confident enough to adapt and lead the process and stay self-motivated. And this was done through the mentoring conversations, the wellness program, our campus coordinator, and the peer mentoring program that we have. So one of the things that we highly recommend, but we have not yet done yet, is the importance of study group. So we believe that study groups are the key element in student support and would be very beneficial for students during this time of online learning, especially in overcoming isolation and promoting self-regulation. We also believe that the study group encourage students to learn how to teach. And we believe that teaching is more effective than actually learning on your own. However, this is something that we have not yet implemented, and we are hoping that today we can learn a bit more about how we can assist students with the process of forming online study group from REAP today. And thank you so much. Over to you, Emma and REAP. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, StudyTrust. Busi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I apologize, colleagues. My daughter has woken up and I wouldn't want to terrorize you with her playing next to me here. So StudyTrust has mentioned that we have already started groups, but actually group learning is something that REAP has not just started as we got into COVID-19 context. I think in 2019, mid-year, we decided to explore the possibilities of harnessing group learning. And so when the COVID-19 context got into our lives, we started with shifting into group learning and it was a transition that was not so hard for us, because it's a landscape that we had been exploring in real life before COVID. So why study groups? We found that it reduces feelings of isolation. It was mentioned in the previous presentation that students are in different parts of the country and they feel a sense of isolation. And so we know that being in a group context, you find belonging, you find a sense of purpose, and it reduces your sense of isolation. Also, it provides a network of academic support. We have different students who are registered for different modules and or different courses rather, and in putting them together in this network, there is a stronger sense of support from an academic point of view, and they know that they can reach out to each other wherever they are in the country. It provides a platform for accountability. It's very, very hard to be by yourself and have the discipline to continue working. And so being within these virtual study groups allows for there to be accountability. It was spoken earlier about the fact that students sometimes lack confidence, and in terms of reaching out to lecturers, in terms of reaching out to tutors or other people that could assist them. We have found that the study groups allow for them to work together and build a sense of confidence and self-esteem in sharing how they get to answers, in sharing how they have worked on processes and brainstormed to get to their answers. It's also a space where they share tips and skills on how to self-manage learning at home. And also we are very lucky at REAP that we've got student development advisors who are familiar with the students and also with the higher education institutional context that guide the students through this process. How were the actual groups formed, the virtual groups themselves? We looked at our cohort in each region and looked at which institutions of higher learning they are coming from. We looked at the study streams that they are registered for. We looked at the academic years that they are in. And we also looked at cohorts from different higher education institutions that are small. For example, you will find that in KZN, you've got more law students as opposed to Bloemfontein. And so we amalgamated those group of students into one virtual study group, which allowed for there to be a sense of a broader community in the first place. And secondly, for there to be cross-pollination of information. And thirdly, to have a sense of a professional academic relationship, which we hope will last not only through this context of COVID, but also post the COVID context. The platforms that we used to anchor our virtual classrooms included WhatsApp groups, included Google Classroom, Zoom, Adobe, Google Meets. I just want to emphasize though that we were very, very cognizant to make sure that our students are leading us in terms of which platforms would work for them best, because of reasons around network and data and infrastructure to get into the classrooms themselves. This slide shows the schematic representation of how we divided our groups. I mentioned earlier that we looked at streams, we looked at higher education institutions, we looked at the number of students that could get into a group. You'll see that we've divided them according to the streams that they are registered for. If you look to your right, the right of your screen, you will see that we've got one student in a group for bee agriculture, and for the sciences. Those kind of students, what we did was look for other students in other regions. Remember, I spoke about the fact that we also looked at other regions and saw how many students are registered for which particular stream. We then were able later on to amalgamate them and group them with students from different parts of the country in different universities into one group, which allowed for this cross-pollination that I'm talking about. I will now hand over to Lorraine to talk to introducing the process to students.
Thank you, Busi. Lorraine Gumede. I'm a regional manager in Gauteng from REAP as well. After we have clustered our students into stream, then we needed to inform the students on the new virtual support that we're offering. The conversations, they started in the contact sessions where they had interactions with their SDAs. It was through telephonic and also through WhatsApp. We sent invitation emails as well so that students will be able to join in the platforms that were recommended at the time. We felt as a staff that we needed to experience firsthand what students will be experiencing in this platform. We then had to have a dry run of sessions where we played around the platform's functionalities so that we are comfortable ourselves to run these study groups or these groups in the platforms. So we had a lot of games at the beginning and competitions in these platforms so that we ease into the process as we were launching the online support. Next slide, Lucy. Thank you. So with the virtual platforms, we felt that we needed to have an orientation session with our students where we took them through on how to join the platforms, the joining options, if we were to invite them in the Google Meets, if we invite them on Zoom, so that the student will be comfortable and be familiar. We went through the meeting guidelines on how to conduct ourselves in this platform, how to raise your hand, and also to look at the functionality that were there to say you can be able to show your reaction or show your mood in these platforms. We also encourage our students to check their connectivity, the broadband speed, so that it will be easier for them to connect and log in these platforms. Thank you. Lucy? Lucy? Next slide. Thank you. So why tutors? I think we've mentioned earlier to say that at the beginning, we had to support students in group sessions. But now that we also offering the academic support, SDAs are not subject matter experts. So we needed to look at our own data and identify subjects that are a bit difficult for our students. We do know from the data that if a student is doing a B accounting qualification, they probably struggle with accounting and taxation. We also do know that students that are in engineering, they struggle with steam plant and thermodynamics. Therefore, we needed tutors to take through students or to facilitate these study groups. So with that, what we needed to think about is to say, now that we have identified the need, how do we then link our tutors to student or to study groups? We also needed to think about the remuneration and also to accommodate the needs of the tutors. So for this year, because of COVID-19, we do know that we are not going to run any student development programs in a form of a live workshop or in a form of a camp. Then we needed to repurpose the budget to accommodate this. Thank you.
As we've mentioned before, we looked at students who are academically strong and who are within REAP, senior students. We looked also at REAP alumni, and we also sourced students from higher education institutions that were given to us via referrals. How did we then contract these students, or rather tutors? How did we find people who would be the best fit for us? We selected them based on their academic results. We also looked at prior experience in terms of tutoring, leadership within their communities, peer support within the REAP program itself, and their motivation. Those two elements were very important because we wouldn't want to overload, particularly the senior students, with tutoring if they did not have the experience that is needed to balance that work. So a total of 51 tutors were contracted and orientated to support a total of 404 students. How did we then manage the study group itself? Right at the beginning, it was very important for us to make sure that we have a flow in terms of our study groups. So we had to make sure we've got co-facilitation, which was important in that when you are in a virtual platform, you would find that there are issues around connectivity, around data. And so some students would find themselves dropping out of the session. So co-facilitators were able to make sure that they connect those students back into the session. Also, the management of chat functions, whether it would be a chat which was running concurrently on a WhatsApp group whilst people were on a Google Meets classroom, or on the app itself, on the virtual classroom itself, as well as note-taking. And this point is relatively important for us because in fact, let me say it is very important for us because the note-taking allows for us to reflect on what has happened in the group, and learnings are able to surface when you have tracked the process that you went through during the group, and therefore you are able to plan and implement better moving forward. We also had to indicate the duration of the sessions beforehand, and this is important because students needed to make sure that they are able to block off the time during the week when the session is going to happen, number one. Number two, they needed to also plan prior to the session to make sure that they utilize the time of the session effectively. We also try to keep our numbers very small, so a minimum of 4 students in a group and a maximum of 8, so that the platforms that we use are able to accommodate them, but that we are also able to give individual attention to students within the group. Also, we wanted to make sure that wherever the students are in the country, in whichever platform that they are on, they are able to, after the group sessions, connect to each other, and keeping the groups relatively small allowed for that to happen. So managing interactions between the students and the tutor was also a dynamic that we experienced, and this one came in 3 parts: managing that relationship prior to the group itself, managing the relationship during the group, and after the group. So how did we manage the interactions prior to the group starting? Students had to be really conscientious and submit their content questions to either the SDA or the tutor at least 1 day prior to the study session. The SDA and the tutor would have to then prepare accordingly. Again, this helped us to maximize on our time whilst we were doing our sessions. And at this point, I just want to state that our group sessions lasted for 2 hours, and having participated in those groups, that 2 hours was actually really very, it became very short because group discussions would come up on specific content that was difficult for students. And so the preparation prior to that was very important. During the group session, tutors focused on prepared content and facilitated academic discussion. SDAs managed the group dynamics because, of course, they know their students well, and they ensured that participation of all students happened. Thereafter, at the end of the group, an agreement would then be reached on which tasks to focus on for the next group and during the time between the existing group and the following group. Also, logistics were discussed and the time of the next group was discussed. Managing the interactions post the group between the students and tutor. Session notes are then finalized by the tutor. The SDA and the tutor debrief the session, and this is very important because, again, this is where learning surface and it allows for better planning for the next group session. And then, of course, planning and preparation for the next session happens. Quite important, reflection with the line manager was one of a staff member within the group was very important to give a sense of, or to give a another view of what the learnings could mean and how planning and preparation could happen and possible improvements could then be implemented. Then post the actual group session, the formalized group session, we have noticed and seen that students connect to the tutor via WhatsApp for any additional assistance. And this allows for a continuation of learning post the scheduled group session. And it keeps the students engaged throughout the week because remember, these groups are done once a week. And so the learning continues post the scheduled time. Lorraine?
So for our dry run sessions, we noticed a number of challenges to say that because of the location of where our students are, the network was an issue. So students will come in and out of the classroom, and sometimes they will be discouraged even to attend the classrooms. And at times it will be an issue of data. It's not even infrastructure issues, but it will be data. And we also noticed that Zoom has a limitation in terms of the time that we would like to conduct these study groups, where it allows only 40 minutes for study groups. Therefore, we had to explore other platforms like the Google Meet and also explore the Google Classrooms, explore the WhatsApp. So joining of students again in the classroom, some joined classrooms very late, and then solutions that we came up with will be shared in a later slide. Lucy? Lucy, next slide, please.
I think my data is a little bit slow.
So in terms of learnings, what we've learned is that students, they do prefer Google Meet than Google Classroom, simply because in the Google Classroom, what is happening is just a streamline of chats without any voiceover. And students would like to see each other when they engage in these study groups. But eventually, most of our study groups, they opted for a WhatsApp sessions to have this in the WhatsApp platform. And when they are in the WhatsApp platform, it's easier for them to see each other, and they can even send voice notes, and they are able to take pictures of their work and share in the classrooms. Next slide, Muslim. Sorry, I will have to open my own presentation.
It seems that Bursary is just struggling with the slides. Perhaps just continue, Lorraine. Oh, there we go.
So SDAs had to be flexible and be guided by students as to which platform is conducive and user-friendly for students. What we have learned in the Google Meet is that it has add-on functionalities where we are able to download a register with the list of names of students who attended and the time when they logged in the system or in that platform, which is a good thing for us because we have a record that we will be able to keep in as a point of reference. So we also learned that another add-on is transcribers, where the system is able, or the platform is able to record the meeting and download it later for our own reference and for our own learning. And it will therefore mean that we have less admin. Recommendations: as we continuously learn, observe, and reflect on each session. As we mentioned earlier on, that the regional manager and the staff, they do sit in forum and look at the emerging themes and look at the actual experience of students and themselves and the platform. We have decided that we are to stick to a scheduled study session or study groups and be consistent in that. For example, if we have a study group from vets in engineering at 10:30 on Tuesday, we would prefer to keep it as it is. But we also allow flexibility should there be anything that will be coming up that will prevent students to attend at that point in time. We also decided to open the rooms 30 minutes before the students joined the classroom so that by the time it starts, everyone is there. It is also important to mention that in our study groups, the first 30 minutes, it's for psychosocial support, where students, they connect, they share their feeling, they check in, and then 1.5 hours, it is a tutorial. So for this one, it's funny because we believe that students are very familiar with social media platforms, and it should be easier for them to just log in whatever platform that we encourage them to be. But it was a different story for us. As a result, we had an orientation at the beginning. At the beginning, participation was very, very slow because of the transition and students having to adapt and the mindset, and also with all the challenges that they were experiencing. So not so many students were participating in these platforms. But as the time went on, we have noticed that a lot of students, they are really, really participating, they're on time, and the behavior and the questions they submit to their tutors are of importance as they have value. So as they become comfortable and they have accepted and seen the value of tutorials, we have seen high participation. On our side as staff, because at the beginning we were a bit anxious about these platforms, and also we needed to learn, we needed to practice, we needed to reflect, we needed to change things. So we're continuously practicing, having dry runs so that we improve our offering and improve our processes. We have alumni also joined us as tutors. So it has been wonderful observing them taking up the challenge and acting as an inspiration to the students that are still active in the program. So it's still a journey for us, as much as we are seeing the impact and we're seeing good results, but we're still learning because it's still a trial and error in some of the areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much to StudyTrust and to REAP for your presentations and for sticking to the time.